Hello, and welcome to the Nerdy Lemon Podcast. This week's episode is going to be one of me by myself. We'll see how it goes. Thanks for listening. There was a period in history, not too long ago, when coffee was a black elixir that would put hair on your chest and was strictly utilitarian. You drank it to wake up, and it cost 25 cents a cup and tasted pretty terrible. Fast forward a little bit in history, now coffee has morphed into something very different. There are specialty coffees where an 8-ounce bag of beans can cost you a pretty penny. You might walk into a nice coffee shop and end up spending $10 on a single cup of coffee. It might have tasting notes of stone fruit, black cherry, and a tobacco finish. Which led me to wonder, what happened to coffee? Hello there, listeners. You might notice a slight increase in our audio quality. I have just learned that I had the gain all the way down on my microphone, but inside of my recording program, it was all the way up. So we were picking up every little squeak, and it should be better now. So I apologize for those foibles. Thank you for continuing to listen. Now, back to our show. To start on our exploration of what happened to coffee, let's take a look at its origin. If you read any book about coffee, it at some point will tell you the story of the humble goat farmer. The fable goes that one day, a herder of goats in Ethiopia noticed his herd munching on some berries from a bush. Shortly after, the herd was suddenly energized, bouncing joyously all over the place. The herdsman made the connection that the cause of this burst of energy must be from those berries. Now, this is just a fable. There's no a specific person that this was referring to. It was just a story that was passed down. However, historically speaking, they would take off the cherry, dry the beans, and eat them after roasting them and mixing them with other stuff. It would kind of like a snack bar that they would make out of those cherries. And while the origins of coffee are as murky as the drink itself, we do know that once humans figured out how to roast and brew these beans, it quickly became a popular drink. Historians have detailed records of coffee gradually making its way out of Ethiopia and through the rest of the world. There are a few notable historical accounts of coffee. Very early on, in 1596, some people were very wary of coffee, noticing its effects on the human body.
This drink they take every morning, fasting in their chambers, out of an earthen pot, being very hot, and they say it strengtheneth and maketh them warm, breaketh wind, and openeth any stopping.
Joking aside, in about a century, coffee went from an unknown pooping potion to a way of life and a cultural phenomenon. Still, some had trouble with the taste. One poet by the name of George Sandys said this:
Black as soot, and tasting not much unlike it.
Later on, coffee became preferred, especially in comparison to alcohol. Booze had a dulling effect, as opposed to coffee, which was described this way:
A drink at once to make us sober and merry.
However, coffee remained in some people's mind a drink to be feared. One notable cereal mogul by the name of John Harvey Kellogg, yes, that Kellogg, described coffee this way:
As a grave menace to the health of the American people.
However, his statement seemed based on, well, nothing. In fact, Kellogg slung his own hot morning beverage of sorts. This drink was made of bread crusts, bran, and molasses. Likely, the cereal mogul was focused on the cash instead of the public's health. Another cereal brand tried to sling Postum, which claimed makes blood red, whatever that means. But it would not be until 1903 for humanity to make espresso. Created by a cafe owner who wanted his coffee to be made faster, he was able to introduce pressure into the coffee making process. However, it would still take almost another century for that espresso and coffee in general to finally become good. Now, I want to take a moment to clarify what I mean by good coffee. I'm a firm believer in the thinking that the best cup of coffee is the coffee that you like. With that out of the way, there are principles to good coffee. James Hoffman outlined some principles in his book, The World Atlas of Coffee, and on his YouTube channel, which, in total honesty, I prefer him on video. His book was interesting and is a great addition to any coffee lover's library, but it's really dry in most parts. The main takeaways from his book, though, are to make sure you have the right grind and the right method. If you want a consistently good cup of coffee, you want to measure your water and the grounds. Keep everything warm, so pre-warm your pot, pre-warm your cups. There is nothing worse than a freshly hot cup of coffee being poured into a cold mug. Anyways, I got sidetracked. We live in a time where great coffee is easy to find. Some refer to this as third wave coffee. Others might refer to it as specialty coffee. It's essentially focusing on the best of everything. They want the highest quality coffee, the best brewing method, and the best machines in way of brewing and of grinding. Third wave also focuses on the quality of the coffee bean itself. With third wave coffee, a very close relationship is formed with the farmer. One source describes it as a farmer-obsessed coffee movement. But before we focus on third wave coffee, we have to discuss the first and second waves. Let's go all the way back to first wave coffee. What would first wave coffee include? According to Augustine Sedgewick's book Coffeeland, he describes first wave coffee as including brands such as Maxwell House, Folgers, and Hills Brothers, the stereotypical supermarket brand coffee. In addition to that, though, there was also instant coffee, which had recently been figured out. Freeze drying was all the rage, so that was the other type of coffee. Big batches made in vats that were freeze dried into crystals that could be made into instant coffee. One of the other contributing factors of what made first wave coffee not as flavorful as our modern day third wave coffee was that most of the beans were of the variety of coffee called Robusta. Now, this was a coffee plant that was larger. It produced more beans and was a more robust plant, which is where the name comes from. However, these beans are typically considered a lower quality bean. Back in the 50s, the Robusta variety was the main plant that was used by farmers because of one of its unique capabilities, that of resisting something called leaf rust. Rather than focusing on a quality coffee cherry, the focus was on how much the plant could yield. This was because farmers were producing a commodity coffee. This is large-scale coffee beans sold for a couple of cents per pound that would fill shipping containers. Now we've arrived at second wave coffee. We're past the cheap supermarket phase, and are now going into the artisanal coffee. These companies would include Peet's Coffee, which started back in the 60s, and eventually we would get Starbucks. In addition to having an emphasis on a better quality of coffee, coffees were now divided into origin, getting closer to the farmer, but not quite third wave coffee. And while Starbucks did not quite get to the third wave level of coffee, they did, however, create something that people usually refer to as the third place. Starbucks coffee shops created a place that was not work, nor was it home, but a tertiary location, a place to build a community or write out scripts for your podcast. Starbucks wasn't the first to come up with the idea of the third place. However, they did popularize it. And now we've made it back to third wave coffee. I mentioned before that coffee buyers focused on their relationship with the farmer. Their belief was that the more coddled the coffee plant was, the better its beans would taste. Now, third wave coffee people like Stumptown, Counterculture, and Intelligentsia all worked hard with the farmer to improve on their craft and move away from commodity coffee. Some specialty coffee could go for $14 a pound. This was green coffee beans. And as a frame of reference, the open market price at the time, in 2011, for green coffee beans was less than $1. All of this was done in a quest for the best possible coffee. And these coffee buyers rejected the idea of a buy low, sell high system. Instead, they adopted the buy high, sell higher system. And for a time, it worked. I say for a time because not all of those coffee buyers are still doing that today. One in particular, Stumptown, is not buying coffee like they used to. And that's because they were bought out. They were bought out by none other than Peet's Coffee. Now, they still roast a mean bean, but they aren't the players in specialty coffee like they used to. A company that used to refuse to sell their coffee to certain retailers because they didn't meet the high standards they had at the time is now owned by a massive corporation. You can now find Stumptown coffee on the shelves of Target and most major grocers. But it doesn't stop there, folks. Intelligentsia was another company that was acquired by Peet's Coffee. Thankfully, the acquisitions stop there. Counterculture is still owned and operated by its founder, and they actually make really good coffee. Of the original specialty coffee companies, they are my favorite. In fact, if you find yourself in San Antonio, La Panaderia brews their coffee, and they do a great job. I will say that it is probably one of the more expensive cups of coffee you can find, but it is well worth it. Because of companies like these, humanity was able to taste some of the best possible coffee, and were able to find new varieties like the geisha variety, which is also known as the Hacienda La Esmeralda. Now, because these are special coffees, they are roasted very lightly. In fact, the geisha variety is usually going to be found as a light roast. It's also generally going to be found for the price of $50 plus. I personally have never tasted this variety of coffee. I have tasted a couple of coffees that have won cups of excellence, but never a geisha. However, I think this would be lost on me since my palate is not super refined. You also can't talk about third wave coffee without talking about the third wave coffee shop. These locations are usually spotted by their fanciness level. You have usually a machine that's prominently displayed that is very expensive and never automatic. It's going to look like something from a futuristic steampunk locomotive. There's going to be levers, there's going to be knobs, and it will be shiny. Don't be fooled though. If the machine has buttons with pictures of caramel macchiatos or lattes on it, it's probably not third wave. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll be bad, but it's not a good start. And that's what happened to coffee. What started out as a mysterious drink from a faraway land became an obsession for the world. I wanted to end our episode with instructions on how to make a good cup of coffee at home and some recommendations of coffee shops here in San Antonio. I do think that the best cup of coffee is the one you like, but also the best cup of coffee is usually made at home. Not just for taste, but for a coziness factor. There's something special about drinking that delicious elixir from your favorite mug. To start, you're going to want to get a Hario V60. It comes in size 1, 2, and 3. Size 2 is perfect for two people. The reason why I like the Hario V60 is because of the funnel and the hole at the base. Usually you'll find three smaller openings rather than one large opening. A single large opening at the base allows the water to go through the grounds without being interrupted uh, needlessly. The other supplies that you'll need will be size 2 filters, fresh water that's filtered, a kettle of any sort, and a scale. Now, I priced some of this. Amazon has a nice little bundle of all the Hario stuff you need for about $25. If you need a kettle, you can buy one for about 15 bucks. It doesn't have to be the fancy gooseneck kettle. And a scale is the same thing. You can find a decent scale that has grams for about $8. Now, in total, it's about $50, but some of this you might have on hand already, and you won't need to purchase anything extra. The other thing is, with this specific method of brewing coffee, you're able to get as fancy or as simple as you'd like. Now to the coffee. To make a coffee, just get something local. Have them grind it for you. Let them know you're using a Hario V60, and they'll know what to do from there. They might try and talk you out of pre grinding the beans, but if you don't have a grinder at home, uh, their grinder will be better. Using a bladed grinder is not the best thing to do, and it can be tricky trying to get the right consistency. Now that you have your grounds, that you have all the equipment, it's time to make the coffee. My preferred ratio is 30 grams of coffee to 480 milliliters of water. Now, just as an easy conversion, 1 gram of water generally equals 1 milliliter of water. So you can just do the 480 grams, which is what I do. Now it's time to make the coffee. What you're going to do is boil your water. If you have a kettle, just flip the switch until it stops. If you have a gooseneck kettle, it'll tell you the temperature at the top, just below boiling point at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, once your water has reached the optimal temperature or the correct temperature, you're going to take it from the heat and pour it directly over the beans. Don't let the water sit and cool down. You want to pour the water when it's at its hottest. Now, first, you're going to do a small pour just to coat the grounds. This is called blooming. This helps get rid of any excess CO2 that might be trapped in the grounds. Once you let it bloom for a couple of seconds, you can then start a big pour. You're going to want to go and pour the water around the perimeter of the funnel. Fill it up pretty much until you can't put any more water in there. And that'll be your first big pour. Let the water go down a little bit. You're going to want to agitate the grounds either by gently shaking the the funnel itself or using a spoon to agitate the beans. You want to have a flat bed for the coffee to be evenly extracted. Once the water has gone through the beans and you have a little bit more space, do another big pour. You might have to do 2 or 3 pours depending on your size, but about 3 is your goal. Any more than that, you might be have your grounds too fine, or if it's going too quickly, you might have them too coarse. But once you've reached your target number of 480 milliliters or 480 grams of water, you'll be ready to enjoy your cup. This ratio will make 2 cups of coffee. They will be on the small side, but it's generally perfect for my wife and I. If you'd like, you can half the ratio, 15 grams of coffee to 240 milliliters of water, but now you'll have your delicious cup of coffee. Now, this might not sound fun, so you would prefer to buy your coffee from somewhere. Well, if you happen to be in San Antonio, I have a few great recommendations. If you don't happen to be in San Antonio, the best thing to look out for is something that's small, locally owned, and roasts their own beans. Most major cities and even most small cities have at least one decent coffee shop. And if you happen to be in San Antonio, these are just a couple of my favorite. The best coffee overall is brown. Their pour over is delicious. Their latte is great. They sell some specialty coffee beans, which is also just a cool thing to have. And I will say to be careful. The bags that say special reserve and are black are very expensive. I will not tell you how I know, but they can be very expensive. My favorite coffee shop for ambience and sitting down is Gold. It's actually not too far from brown. I'm also realizing it's also a color. Not all the coffee shops I like are just one syllable color words. But Gold is really nice. It's closer on the south side. It has some really cool art. And again, the coffee is delicious. The third coffee shop on my list, that is my third favorite, is Poetic. They make really good coffee. They roast it themselves, and they're a really small shop. It's really cozy when you go in, and overall, it's pretty great. Those are my recommendations. Just want to clarify everything that I recommended so far, from the coffee shops to the supplies. I am not paid to say any of this. We're such a tiny show, and we're just started, so you can take all of my recommendations for their face value, and nobody told me to say it. But if anyone would like to pay me to say things, please message the show. You can find us on Instagram or our social medias, which will be linked in the show notes, and we'll mention them at the end of the episode. I will sell out so quickly. I also hope that I did not come across as a coffee snob. I do firmly believe that the best coffee is the cup of coffee that you enjoy. If you enjoy instant coffee, more power to you. You can easily wake up and have coffee ready, and you can enjoy it. Now, if you do like instant coffee, I would recommend trying to make it inside of hot milk. It kind of gives you a latte taste, and it's how my in laws enjoy their coffee. And it's really enjoyable. They do it with like honey, and it makes me feel all warm and cozy. This has been an episode of The Nerdy Lemon. These are one of my What Happened To episodes. It's usually me by myself with a couple of guest voices reading certain quotes from my resources. Special thanks to Leslie for being the voice of coffee in today's episode. If you would like to support our show, consider telling a friend. It's free and an effective way for me to grow my audience. If you have some money laying around that instead of throwing away you'd like to give to me, consider supporting our Patreon. There we have some additional bonus content. We have one episode on there right now and a couple of posts with some artwork that shows some behind the scenes that I do on the show. If you'd be interested in that and you'd like to support the show, I'd be eternally grateful. Right now, I do this just as a hobby. I would love it to replace my current job, but we have some time to go before we reach that point. And that's it this week. You might have noticed we had episodes coming out every week for a little while. We're going to go ahead and stop that. It's a lot of work, but I thoroughly enjoy it. And I hope you do too. I hope you have as much fun listening to it as I have fun making this program. Our new posting schedule will be 2 episodes a month. It might be an episode I record with my dad. It might be an episode like this. You can find the Instagram page for this podcast on Instagram at The Nerd Lemon. You can buy merch for the show on our TeePublic. Thanks for listening and stay rad, everyone.
I like reading for your podcast.
I like you reading too, because I can't read.